the last time we worked with lists and sets and tuples and dictionaries, and we didn't get a chance to look at conditions and conditional blocks in Python. So that's what we're going to do today. We'll be looking at conditional statements and also how we can write blocks of code together and how indentation works in terms of keeping those blocks of code together and how then Python compiles them and sees them as one set of code essentially. So we'll be looking at different kinds of conditions that we can use. So essentially, like in our English language, let's say, we ask each other questions which can have a set of yes and no answers. The same way in programming, there's oftentimes when we're through the course of the program or the script that we're writing, we often ask the user questions about different data that they're supposed to, that we expect an answer of a yes or no out of it so that we can then work on those results. And these are essentially done using the if statements. And what these are called are conditions. We can combine these questions, and if we're using multiple conditions or multiple questions to assess something, then those would be essentially called blocks. So this can be done using a combination of the if statements in the same statement in a single line, or we can do it in the form of a nested if statement, and we'll be looking at all of those. So what are conditional statements? So like I mentioned earlier, when we're writing a program, you want to run a block of code only if a certain condition is met. So you want to check first if, for example, if you are asking for someone's age and then you want to decide if you are going to assign them a learner's permit for driving or not. So you can only do that if they're above 18 or above 18. So that's just a very simple example of a condition that you want to be met and then run the rest of the script. And we'll be looking at more of these. And this is where conditional statements come in. These are called conditions or conditional statements. And they allow you to control the flow of your program more effectively. Now there's, like I mentioned, there's different condition tests that you can run. There's the simple if test, then there's an else test, and then there's an elif, which is essentially short for else if. So if you want to combine multiple conditions, again, you can do this using if then else, elif, or a nested if statement. Or you can actually use all of these within a program as well. So we'll be looking at that. So if, else, and elif statements. So what is an if condition essentially? So an if condition for Python returns the result of either true or false. It helps you evaluate whether the question you've asked is returning a true value or a false value, or a yes or a no, essentially, a simple on or off switch kind of a thing. So the statement will execute a block of code if a specified condition is true. So only if the condition is met, then Python would run the remaining script. Else it would just, kind of skip that block of code and move on to the next block. So an if condition can be used with simple mathematical conditions, which we've gone through earlier as well. An equal to, a not equal to, less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. So these are simple, very simple if conditions that we will be experimenting with. And then these can be combined together using the keywords or and. Now, as we've repeated over the last sessions as well, we need to be very careful in Python about the case. So Python is case sensitive. The if or if should always be in lowercase. If you're writing it in uppercase, or if you're writing a capital I and then a small f, or the other way around, it will not be able to identify what you're trying to write. So Python is essentially, the default case for Python is lowercase. So all statements, all conditions, all functions, everything in Python is essentially supposed to be written in lowercase for it to be able to interpret or understand what you're trying to tell it to. Also, what we mentioned earlier, Python is sensitive to indentation. So you need to be careful that when you're writing a block of code, the number of spaces you give before each line has to be consistent. So if you're using a single white space or a single space, essentially, or a single tab, it has to be consistent throughout that block of code. If you're giving in 2, it has to be the same. And then for 3, I'm going to, I think I might have an image here. I'm going to show you what I mean by that. Okay. Can you see this screen here? It has, I have not written any code. It's just to essentially explain what blocks of code means. So I've written just line of code. So let's say there's, this is the starting line for your Python code, and you're writing one line of code, which is, you're not using any spaces before that. So that would be considered one block. Then if you're using spaces, here I've used a tab space before the next line of code, this in green would be considered a second block. So this would be different from the first block. This here again.
Wait, ma'am, I forgot the name of the first block. What was it called?
It doesn't have a name. It's just going to be a first block, let's say. It doesn't have a name. This is just to tell you that everything that has an equal number of spaces, or let's say everything that's aligned together, it's going to be considered one block of code by Python.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so this here, the green one is going to be considered one block. So this is the second block. This would be a separate block. And then if you notice here, when we moved out of this block, we moved the code one step back. So it's now aligning with the same as the one above, which means that for Python, this whole green part is one block of code now. So this orange part is a separate block of code, but this would be part of block 2. So again, anything that is aligned in the same line, essentially, is considered the same block of code. Similarly, all the blue lines would be considered one block. So you may say that the blue one is the main block, and then this is a sub block, the green one, and then the orange one is like another, let's say, a sub to it. Okay, you'll understand this better when you're working in the idle shell and when writing a script that has actual code written in it, then you'll be able to understand. But this is just to show you that whenever you're writing code, it needs to be aligned properly, because Python does not use brackets, but instead it uses this indentation or alignment of the code essentially to be able to understand what you're trying to tell it to do. Okay. So again, any set of statement conditions that belongs in the same block of code should be indented in the same way. And the way you write an if condition is that you start with the if word, and then you tell it whatever condition you want to give it. For example, if age is less than 18, or if age is greater than 18, and then this colon, this is important. So if, then there's the condition, and then there's this colon. And then in the next line, you tell it whatever you would want to do if the result of this condition was true. So again, this is a diagrammatic representation of how it works. So there's an if condition. This is essentially a decision block. If it's true, it's going to run whatever is written inside of the if statement. So in the next block of code, if it's false, it's going to ignore that block of code and move on to the next line in code for the main block. Okay. So an if condition doesn't have to be a single statement. So whatever you're assessing in the if statement, underneath it, it does not have to be a single line of code. Again, anything that you write with similar indentation or in the same alignment would be considered a part of the if statement. So it can have a block. So for example, here, it started with x equals 4, and then it said if x is less than 5, first print x is smaller than 5, then print this means it is not equal to 5 either, and then print x is an integer. So you can have multiple print commands. You can also have multiple other commands within if statements, essentially as blocks of code. Again, we've looked at blocks of code, but here again, all programming languages can create blocks. Python has a unique way of doing it because it is defined only by indentation. Again, this is very important because a lot of the times, new programmers in Python have troubles, getting the right results out of their scripts, or even being able to run their scripts because of this indentation issue. So there's two issues that I've often come across with programmers who are just starting to write with Python. One is that Python is sensitive to the case that you're using. So you should use lowercase when you're working with Python. And the second, you should be very, very, very careful about indentation. So here again, this is an if condition, and these are all the statements that are part of the if condition. But this, because it's not aligned in the same, is not a part of the block. So again, a condition, this works with if and else statements. So a condition, if it's true, a certain action would be done. If it's false, an alternate action would be done, and then the rest of the code would be run. This is the else condition, sorry. Now let me know if you want me to do a little exercise on the shell with just the if condition, or should we combine the if and the else conditions and then do them on the shell? Because I think it's going to be a lot of overlap if we do just the if condition. But again, I leave it up to you. Let me know in the comments, please, or in the chat.
I think it's better if we do it at the end together.
Okay.
If else.
Okay. What about the rest? Or okay, so we're having mixed responses. Okay, I'll do like maybe one or two if statements on the idle shell, and we won't write a complete script. We'll do that when we're done with the else part. Okay. I'm going to share the shell now. And I also need to share the script. Okay, so what we're trying to write in the script was essentially that we asked the user for an input for their age, and we give it this prompt, how old are you? We ask the user, and then whatever number, the input, we check it against the number of 18, because as you all know, if you're 18 or above, you can get a driver's permit or a learner's license. And if you're not, then you can't. So we essentially, this is a very short script that is going to ask the user for an input and then check and let them know if they can be given a driver's permit or they cannot be given a driver's permit. Okay. Another thing here, there's two ways of how you can do it. Because when you're asking the user for an input here, the user can essentially enter anything. I'm going to copy paste this to the shell. So Control C. Can you see the shell?
Yep, we can.
Okay. So when you're asking the user to input their age, they would either input a number, let's say 12, okay, or they could also input something like an ABC and would not give an error, essentially. Because like we did earlier as well, when we are asking the user for an input, we did not specify if we wanted the user to put in an integer or a string. So it would not give an error. If the user input a string in the result or in front of the question, it's just going to simply save it into age and then it won't be able to compare it. So what we need to do to make sure that it gets an integer as an input, we're going to change this a bit. So we're going to do int in front of it.
Sorry, are you in script mode or in the shell?
I'm on the shell. You can't see the shell?
No, we still see the script.
Okay.
I still see the script at least.
Let me. Okay, I've shared all of these apparently in mine, but I'll. Okay. Okay, here. Do you see it now? Yeah, okay. Yes. So what I did here was I asked the user for an input. The first input was a 12. Then asked the user for an input again. The second input was a string and did not give an error. That's because we did not specify that you wanted to convert the input to an integer essentially, or that you wanted the user to give a number. So we change it a bit. What we do is we add int to the start of it. We've actually done this in the, I believe in the very first lesson, where we asked the user for an input and we wrote int in the beginning to make sure that it was saved as an integer. So now when we save anything, it's going to be saved as an integer and you would be able to compare it using the simple, greater than or less than sign. So let's say if you do age greater than 18, it gives you a false. And if you do age less than 18, it gives you a true, because it's basically comparing age using these comparison operators to the number 18, which we set as the age for our permit. Now, if we want to have a look at the script again. So this was the script. We asked the user for an input. I'm going to add int here as well in the form of an integer. And then whatever input
I
we
don't
gave.
understand what you're doing. I'm trying to write, but like I can't write. Like you're moving on and moving on. Like I'm trying to write.
Okay, I'm going too fast.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is essentially the same thing that I wrote in the shell as well. Okay, in the script. So this part here, age equals int, which is integer, and then input, how old are you? This is the same thing that I wrote in the shell. Okay. And then we're going to compare it to, again, the number 18. We'll see if age is less than 18. We're going to print to the screen, you cannot be given a driver's permit yet. And if age is greater than 18, we're going to print you are eligible for a driver's permit. Okay, have you written this down? Should I run it on the shell and see? Mohammad Azam, have you written this part? Are you still writing, or should I run it on the shell and see what it
You can move
does?
on now. You can move on.
Okay, so now we're going to run it on the shell, okay? So if you see the shell now, it's asking, how old are you? And you give it a number, let's say 22, and it tells you you are eligible for the driver's permit. Okay, if we run it again, and this time we give it the number 14, it's going to tell you you cannot be given a driver's permit. So essentially, this is a very simple conditional statement. When you're asking the user for an input, you're checking if it meets your criteria, and then you're printing out an output depending on if it's met the criteria or if it's not. So this is a very, very simple example of an if statement. Now you can do these with strings, you can do these with numbers. You can also do these, in fact, with lists and stuff, where you check whether a value is a part of a list or it isn't. Let's see, I think this is the last bit I'm going to do before we move on to the else part. So we made a list of colors the last time. Let's see, we make another one. Okay, so now we have a list by the name colors, which has red, yellow, pink, blue, and purple in it. If we want to check if there's a certain value within a list, we can use it, do it in the form of an if statement, or we can do it simply, there's other ways to do it as well, but let's try and do it in the form of an if statement. It's again not, for some reason it's not working here. Okay, now it did. So this is essentially checking if red, which is here in the list, is in colors. So this is a different way to use an if statement to check if a certain value is already included in your list or not. Now, if you can use the else statement later on as well when we study about it to, print two kind of two outputs. So if red is in colors, then print this. Else, you can choose to add red to the list or tell the user that this color is not in the list, or you can also do both. So we're going to experiment with that as well after we've done the else statement. I hope I'm not confusing you with this list part, but just because we were doing lists last time and it would be fresh in your memory still, so I wanted to, let you know how you could use the if command to work around lists as well, because that is something that lists or dictionaries is something that you would probably be using quite a bit when you're actually, working on data. Okay, so moving back to the slides.
Just one question.
Yes.
Compiler cannot differentiate between, so in the beginning when we entered the age,
Yes.
and if we don't assign into it, then there is an error. So compiler is basically, it cannot differentiate if it is an integer or a string if you don't specify int there, right?
Yes, because in that case, yes, because like I said, I also, in an example, I also entered ABC.
Yeah.
Start of the question.
Yeah.
So the compiler would try to, take that is in as an integer as well if we try to compare it. But when it tried to compare it, would realize that it's not an integer. So to do that, we either add the int in front of the input command, or what we do is we can later convert it. So there were ways, functions that I showed you earlier that we could use to convert different number types, or also between different data types. So you can use those conversion methods to take in whatever input the user gave, convert it to a string, and then run the remaining.
Yeah, actually, right in the beginning when we haven't written int with it, I ran it here and then it gave this error that this less than command is not supported between instances of string and int. But yeah, it's clear from this explanation why it happened.
Yeah, because it did not realize what it was storing inside it, if it was an integer or a string. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome. Okay, I have this question here. Colors are an array. It can also be called an array. A list can also be called an array. It is essentially kind of an array, but there's more functions really that you can use with lists. And then also because tuples and dictionaries and sets, all of those would also be essentially kinds of arrays. So this is, let's say, defining them further from an array. Does that answer your question? Okay. Okay, so moving on to the else condition. So an else condition is usually combined with an if condition. So a statement, essentially an else statement is combined with an if statement, and it contains a block of code that you would run if the condition was not met. So if the condition here was met, it would give you a yes, and then you would run this block of code. If it gave you a no for this, then it's going to move on to the next statement, and it's going to run this. So this essentially, like in simple English language, do this or this kind of a thing. So if and else, if you don't do this, then do this kind of a, it's like a simple English language condition really. So you're telling it to either do this or this, because again, if statements can only be can only have a true or a false, or a yes or a no, or a 0 or a 1 value. So they can only have 2 values. So if one value isn't met, then the other is done, essentially. So that's what an else statement does. So it's an optional statement. You can put it in there if there are things that you want the program to do. If you want the program to simply exit instead of doing something else, then you leave out the else statement. It's going to simply, if it didn't find an answer to the if, it's going to simply exit out of it. So this is an example. Again, we're going to do more in the shell. So for an else condition, gender, input gender, and then you compare it. So if gender is male or gender is male, which is because in case they've entered it using a capital M or a small m, then print your cat is male. Else, print your cat is female. Then age, integer, input age of your cat. If age is less than 5, your cat is young. Else, print your cat is an adult. Now, if you notice here, they've used this or statement here. This is essentially used to combine two if statements. An or function or an or operator, you may call it. You can also use an and operator. They have slightly different functions. So this would check two conditions. So if this or this, so if either of them is true, then it's going to write to the screen, your cat is male. Else, it's going to print, your cat is a female. So this checks for two in the same statement, essentially. So checks for equals male with a small m or equals male with a capital M. So it's checking for two conditions. That's what we do using the or operator. So either this or that. Now, if you want both of the conditions to be met, so not just one condition, but both. So this would return true if this was true or this was true. Both would not have to be true. If you wanted both to be true, then you would write and. Now that it wouldn't work here, obviously, but it would work in other conditions. If there are different kinds of conditions that you want to combine, you can write if one condition and another. So it would only go into this block of code if both of the conditions are true, or return a true answer, or return a yes response, let's say. So elif, again, elif is the same as else if, and it's essentially a short form of else if. So if you have, let's say you have multiple conditions and they could have multiple responses to it, and you want to make sure that you are able to assess all of the responses, that is when you use the elif condition. So again, it allows us to check for multiple expressions. So if a condition is false, it would check the condition for the next elif block and so on. So it would check if another condition is met, or another condition is met, or another is met, and so on, depending on how many elif blocks or elif conditions you have in there. And then usually if all of the conditions are false, so if none of the if or else if work, then it's going to go to the else block and run that. We're going to look at an example. So it's important to note that an if block can only have one else block, but it can have multiple elif blocks. So an else block is essentially if nothing else is met, then you go to the else block. So it can only have one else block, but you can have multiple elif blocks in there. So this is kind of a loop where you test an expression. If it's true, you go inside whatever is written in if. If it's false, you check for another condition using elif. Now, if that's true, you go into whatever is written in elif. Otherwise, you go into what's written in else. Again, there could be multiple elif commands here and then move on to the else, or there could be a single one. There could also be none, like we discussed earlier. So, for example, if x equals 3, sorry about that. So if x equals 3 is what we've saved in the variable x. So we're going to check it for its values now. So if x equals 2, it prints 2. Else, if x equals 3, it prints 3. Else, if x equals 4, it prints 4. Else, it prints something else. So you could go on with the else if statements, maybe up to 10, maybe up to 20. It's your choice, really. You could also do other comparisons. So if it's greater than a certain number or less than a certain number, print something else. And then if it doesn't meet any of those, then it goes to the else block and it prints that it's something completely else that we haven't been able to figure out in our script. Okay. Okay, so we're going to do a few examples before we go on to, combining these together. Any questions so far? Because, oh yeah, we still have about 15-20 minutes to the break. So I think we can do one example before that, but if you have any questions, please let me know.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, I'm here.
I thought no one could hear me.
Yeah. Yes, do you have a question? Okay, that's good.
Could you share your entire screen so we can see your script and the shell at the same time in case you'll be writing the conditions in the script?
Okay.
Also, if you could also explain a little about the indentations, like demonstrate how that's done in the loops.
Okay, yes, I was thinking about doing that. So writing a code that did not have the current indentation and then the kind of error that you would get. Okay, so do you see the whole screen now? I'm going to open up the script as well. We're going to write a different script for this, but then again, I'm going to open this up and, change it a bit to show you how you would get an error if you messed up the indentation. Okay, so let's say we want to add within the same script that we were running already for the permit, we want to add some more lines. So
Ma'am, I'll be right back, okay?
okay, sure.
I need to restart my device.
Okay. Okay, let's say we added this. So we want to print two statements. One, we want to print you cannot be given a driver's permit yet. The second, print apply again in, and then we do age minus 18. Oh, sorry, it's going to be 18 minus age. I'm sorry about that. Minus age because it's less than 18 years. So we're basically telling the user to apply again in a certain number of years, depending on whatever age they're in. Okay, we're going to try and run this. It's going to run on this one. Okay, so 12, and it's given us 2 print statements. So you cannot be given a driver's permit yet. Apply again in 6 years. Okay, so you basically, again, like we did earlier as well, we've combined a mathematical operation within a print statement. This is just to, you know, kind of go over what you've done so far as well and kind of combine it with what you're doing today. Okay, so this is how, if you notice here, we've used the same alignment. So it's considering it to be one block of code. So both of these are considered to be a part of the same if statement. It's one block of code. But what if you used different indentation? So let's say you accidentally pressed a space key before this print. Would it consider a same block of code, or would it give you an error, or what would happen? It should essentially give you an error. The error may vary with the kind of version you're using, because now I think they give more detailed errors, but let's still try and run it and see what happens. Okay, so it did not run it. If you notice here, if you can see the screen, it's given you a syntax error, unexpected indent, and it's highlighted where the intent is. So in earlier versions of Python, it would have just given you an unexpected indent error. It would not have told you where it was, or it would just have given you a syntax error and wouldn't have even told you that it was an intent error. So these are just things that they've kind of built up as they've improved on the different versions. So now they give you more details of where you could have gone wrong, so that it's easier for you to fix it and then move on. So do you see this? You get an unexpected indent error, and it's refusing to essentially run your script unless you fix it. Mohsina, should I wait for Muhammad Azam to be back, or?
I'm back already. I was listening.
Okay, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Okay, so any questions here? I just wanted to show you what would happen if you messed up your indentation. So I just wanted to give you an example of that as well.
Are we going to do an example for else if right now? Or?
Yes, yes, we're going to do it right now because we take the break at 3:15, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to do it now. So what we can do is we can change the same to, first we're going to change it to else if, else, and then we're going to later change it to elif as well. Okay, so instead of if here, we write an else here. So using the same essentially, instead of giving it 2 if statements, we've told it if age is less than 18, print this. If it's greater than 18, print this. So essentially it's going to give you the same output, but it just makes your code a little better. So now anything that did not go in here, it's going to essentially go in here. Okay, going to run the same way. We're going to run it again and see. Okay, it's giving me an invalid syntax. Why is that?
I think we should not write age is greater than 18. Else would logically mean that.
Yeah. This is, we don't need the condition here. Yes. Thank you for that. Yeah. So when you change your code, that's one problem that you run into. Okay. So yes, you would still need the colon though, because that's a part of the condition. It tells Python that you're actually running a condition. Okay, so it's going to give you one little, problem here. Let's do this first. Okay, and then let's try and run it again and enter 18. Eligible. So you notice here, when we ran okay, we should have not probably changed it here, but I'm going to change it back and then show you how this is different from the other one. So I'm going to comment this out. Why is this not working? What is it? For now. And we're going to run this again and see what happens if we put in 18. So you'll notice here, now if we didn't have the else statement and we put in 18 as our age, it could not go into any of the if statements because we did not put in an equal to in any of the if statements. So the two statements that we had or conditions that we have was if the age was less than 18 or if the age was more than 18. It did not check if the age was exactly 18. Okay, so the difference between this and using the else statement is, as we did above, when you use the else statement, so anything that wasn't a part of this would automatically go into the else statement. It would not check whether it's equal, whether it's greater than. If it's not less than, essentially it would go to an else. So this is something actually I just noticed here. Another way to go around it would be to, use this. So greater than, equal to. So we'd check essentially for either if it's equal to or greater than, but there's both ways to do it. Okay. We should, try some maybe a little complicated else statements, which would give us a better answer maybe.
Ma'am, can you have the break now?
We're going to have the break at 3:15 to 3:30, okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's maybe try something other than 8. So I'm going to open a new file and write something else in here. You can try writing your own scripts, anything that comes to your mind, and then we can see if you run into any problems with it while I'm writing this, okay? Because I'm just thinking off the top of my head and trying to write something that makes a little sense and is not complicated. Okay, so this is just a very random script. So it's asking the user for their favorite color. And if they say if their favorite color is pink, says wow, that's my favorite color too. That's my favorite too. If they say it's white, so this is essentially an elif statement. Then it says, I've heard white depicts pure soul. If they say it's blue, it says just like the sky above right now. And if they say anything else, essentially it prints, have you always had this as your favorite? Okay. So I just wanted to do something different with, apart from, numbers and ages and stuff. So this is very random, but we're going to save this. And then we're going to run it. So color.py. And then let's try and run it. And I hope we don't run into any errors. But then again, if we do,
how are you, ma'am, I'm writing an idle shell. How are you writing in color.py do KSS color?
Okay, so you're not writing a script, you're writing on the shell directly?
Yeah.
Okay, we can always, like we did a whole, part of the exercise on opening a file and, opening a new file and writing a script. So in the idle shell file, new file, and then you write whatever your script you want to here, and then you can save it. So that's what I did. I opened a new file. I wrote the script here, then I went to the file again and I saved it. And then I can run it directly from here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you see a run command here. You click on it and it's going to give you option, and you simply, okay. So it gives me an invalid syntax because, yes, you know why that happened? Because I forgot the colon. So you see, like I said, because I don't work with Python a lot, I work with Perl. So I mix up syntax for both of these. But yes, it gave me an error because I forgot the colon. So when you're writing your script, please remember to write the colon always. We also need to write it in front of the else. Okay, save it again and we run it. So it's running now so far. If you see my shell, the bottom here, it's asked, what is your favorite color?
Ma'am, I need to write
the script.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you see that now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to write, let's say, I'm going to write a different color. I'm not going to write any of the. So I wrote green and it asked me, have you always had this as your favorite? Okay. So because it did not match any of these, I only put in 3 options. It did not match any 3 of these. So it essentially executed what was in the else part. Okay. If we run it again, and let's say I put in blue. So what it did here was it checked the first one. If equals pink, it did not match. So it went on to the next one. It ignored this completely, because if it did not match this condition here, it's going to ignore what's inside of there. Then it went to this. It did not match this, so it ignored this as well. Then it went to the next block, checked for this. It matched this, so now it's going to go inside of this elif command, okay, elif condition, and it's going to execute whatever is written here. Again, it could have been one print command, it could have been multiple print commands, it could have been other commands in here as well. So we just, to make it simple, we just added in one line of code. So here, because it found it here, so it's executed here, and now it doesn't need to go to the else part because it's already found one of them to be true. Okay. In the first one, because it did not find any one of them to be true, it went to the else statement. Does that make sense? So let's write another small simple script using if, else if, and else. So again, we're going to ask the user for an input. Okay, instead of writing this again, maybe I should try and copy paste it from the other one, so it doesn't take very long. This one. Okay, so let's do price. We take an input again, an integer form from the user. How much does this game cost?
Ma'am, I'm still writing. Can you go like a bit back? In this one, but like, can you go a few words back? I'm still writing.
Okay, I just maybe extend this so you're able to see all of it. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so generally, I wouldn't advise, copying scripts and editing them because uh, it just it kind of makes you run into more errors. The same way we say about other things as well, that instead of copying someone else's work, it's easier to write it from scratch. But then again, I didn't want to do a lot of typing and take up too much of your time. But I would advise you not to copy paste your scripts, at least in the start, and instead write them from scratch. I'm going to, go over the script with you. Meanwhile, we can also see if there's any errors in there. You can let me know as well. And then we're going to try and run it. Okay. First of all, I'm going to save it. So to save it in the same location.
Ma'am, I was still writing.
Yes. Just a second. Yes, you can write now. I was just saving it. So it doesn't matter essentially where you save it. I'm just saving it to the same location to, keep them all in one place for myself. But when you're running the script from here, it's going to take you to that particular location and run it from there. So you don't have to worry about it being in a different location from the last one and giving you an error. Okay, so what we wrote in the script was that we're taking again an input from the user in the form of an integer. We're asking the user how much does this game cost, and if they say whatever price that they give, we save it in the price variable, and then we have a certain number of conditions that we want to check that the price is less than equal to. So we're not just using less than. This was another operator that we worked with earlier as well. So less than equal to, so which means that if it's less than 50 or equal to 50 essentially, then we say print, that's a good bargain. I think I can buy more than one. Else if or elif. Now here we're combining two. So like I mentioned, we can use the or the and operators to combine and check for two or more essentially, but two I think in this case, conditions in one go. Again, you can use this for multiple conditions as well, but we're just going to keep it simple and check for two. So we check if
Ma'am, I want to tell you, in the second one print, I would have liked it lower, but I think I can work with the, can you go forward so I can write it?
Okay, maybe we can take it to the next line. Okay. So instead of keeping this too long, we can print it as another. So does this make it easier?
Yes, a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So we're checking for two conditions at the same time. So one, price has to be greater than 50 and it has to be less than equal to 75, which means that if the price is between 51 and 75 essentially, because this will not include 50, it's greater than 50. So if the price is between 51 and 75, then it's going to go in here. Now this would not return true if it was greater than 50, but not less than 75. So if either of these was false, it's not going to return true. So in the next one, we check if the price is greater than 75, which means 76 or more. but it also has to be less than 100. Okay, so again, we're checking for two conditions in the same statement using the AND command. So for AND, both of these have to be true. So the price has to be between 76 to 100. Okay, and then we print that is getting pretty expensive now. And else, if it does not match any of these conditions, or so not the if, not the elif, if it doesn't match any of those, then it goes to the else block and it prints whatever is in here. So I'm sorry, this is out of my range. Okay. Does the script make some sense? Should we try and run it now? Yes, okay. So let's try and run it and see if it works as we would like it to. So let's say we start with how much does this game cost? 30. So it wins the first one. That's a good bargain. I think I could buy more than one. Okay, let's run it again. And let's say we write 80. So it skipped the first one and the second one, and it went on to the third one because the price was greater than 75. So, and it was less than equal to 100. So it printed, this is getting pretty expensive now. It should have been expensive. Why did I write B here? Sorry about that. Okay, we're going to run it again. And we're going to write, not here, we're going to write 120 here. Okay, and then it's essentially gone into the else because it could not meet any of these conditions, and it's printed, I'm sorry, this is out of my range. Okay, does this make sense? Do you see how if and else can be combined together, and even for a single thing, in this case a price, you can check for multiple conditions and then ask your program to do whatever you want it to do, print something to the screen or use another, perform another function on it based on whatever the response from the user is. So did any of you try writing any scripts of your own, even simple ones, 1-2 lines, that you might have run into problems with? Maybe we can look into those, or we can try and write, a script or two more and then move on to nested ifs.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you couldn't hear me. What did you say before?
Which part? I was asking if you've written any scripts of your own, and if you run into any problems, you can try and go over those. Maybe take 5-10 minutes to do that, or we can write another script and try and use and or again, and all of these functions, conditions, to have a better idea of how they work. It's, I'm just waiting for a response from you guys. What would you like to do before we move on to the nested if?
Ma'am, another question. Are we still doing the stuff of week 3, or this is now the stuff of week 4?
No, this is still week 3. So I did not
so much in week 3.
Yeah, this was supposed to go a little faster, but you had some trouble with the lists and the sets and all of those. So we decided to take it a little slow. Essentially, generally, when even
Ma'am,
when
I
you're going through courses online, else if statements are only, take up about an hour of your time.
Ma'am, I think that many people are absent because we're only 6 and the class is only like 10. So I think like maybe 3 or 4 people are absent.
Yeah, I noticed that not everyone had joined today. Maybe they knew that we were going to work on last week's lesson because we had missed out on the slides and they were there in your Google Classroom. I'm not sure. So if no questions, we can write one more script and then move on to nested ifs. Okay. So let's go back to this, this, and make a few changes here and then run it. So we're going to save it as a different file, color2.py, and again, we're going to ask the user for an input, what is your favorite color? Then we're going to check if the favorite is pink. So we're going to combine statements here again. Okay, and we're going to use or here. So if it's pink or okay, I missed the brackets here. It was going to give me an error later on. Okay, we're going to leave this as is. Okay, so now we've changed this a bit. So the same color script that we wrote earlier, but now we're going to check for multiple colors. So if the input is either pink or purple, So or means that if either one of them is true, it's going to go into this block of code. So it's going to print very cute pic. Not pics, it's going to be pic. So if it's white or black, it's going to print yin yang. If it's blue or green, so you must like nature. And if it's none of those, then it's going to say, have you always had this as your favorite? Okay, so we're going to try and run this and then see if our OR operator works like it should. So let's run. It's asking me for my favorite color in here, and I am going to write red. And because it did not have red in any of these here, what it did was it skipped all of these and it went directly to the else block and then printed, have you always had this as your favorite? Okay, now let's try and run this again and pick a color from one of the options that are there. So let's say black. So now what it did was it printed yin yang. If you notice, if we run it again and we put in white, it's going to print the same output. That's because here in this part, in the else if statement, we've told it to check if the user inputs white or black. So if either one of these is true, it's going to print this. Okay, so we had a look at simple if else statements. We had a look at simple if else if statements or elif statements. We put in more than one print commands in the statements to see that it's essentially considered one block of code and both of those commands are run. Then we've also seen the use of the AND operator, which we did in the last script when we were looking at the price of the game and comparing it. And we've now had a look at the OR operator to see how the response would change in terms of how the elif statement of the if statement would work. Okay, so to give you kind of like an overview or a summary, let's say, so an if is a condition that either returns a yes or a no response. And if it returns a yes response, anything inside of the if statement would be run by Python. If it returns a no response, it's going to ignore everything inside of that and move on to the next statement. The next statement could either be the end of the code, it could be an else statement, or it could be an else if statement. So an else if statement will essentially check for another condition, and an else statement wouldn't check for any condition. Essentially, if the if condition returns a false, it's going to do everything else that's going that is in the else statement. Okay, so an if statement checks for a condition, an else if statement also checks for a condition. An else statement does not have a condition because anything that is false for the if would go to an else. Okay, I hope that makes it clear. Should we move on and look at nested if statements, or do you have any questions so far about this? Because I know that we are lagging behind on the syllabus and we would have liked to cover it more quickly. But again, there would have been no point of covering it too quickly if you did not understand what we were doing. So we wanted to make sure that whatever you learn, you are actually able to apply it and we are able to go through any questions that you might have. So again, and let me know if you have any questions so far about conditional statements and about the different operators used within them. Else we can move on to how we combine different if statements. So you can have if statements inside of if statements. Those are called nested if statements. Okay, we don't have very many participants here. In fact, apart from me and Mosana, we just have 3. So please, I'm waiting to hear from 3 of you. Muhammad Biral Khan, Muhammad Azam, and Muhammad Mudassir. Okay, I've heard from Muhammad Mudassir. What about Azam and Bilal?
It's fine. Yeah, we can move on to yesterday.
Okay, okay. Okay, that's good. What is happening here? Okay. So the nested if conditions. So we've done if, and else statements, but what if we wanted to have multiple conditions inside of a condition? So if we wanted to have multiple if conditions and we wanted to check if the first one was met, then we check for the next one and the next one and the next one and so on. So this can be done using what is called nesting or nested if statements. Essentially, what does is that you write statements inside of the statement block for another statement. And again, the way to tell Python that you're using nested statements is using indentation. So that is the only way that Python would be able to figure out the kind of nesting that you're doing. And they can get a bit confusing because again, then there's too many blocks of code essentially inside blocks of code. So it's generally, they should be avoided and there would be other ways of going around it. But if you feel that you can't avoid them and that is certainly what you want to do, then we will still go over how they can be done. So if test condition 1, so if the test condition is true, then it will go inside this block and then check for test condition 2. And if that is true, then you can add in another condition as well. Or if that is not true, then it would go to this else and execute this. And if none of this was true, then it would go to the main else. So this would be the main if and else. This would be the second level if and else. There could be a third level if and else and a fourth level and so on. But again, the number of levels or the number of nesting that you do is probably going to be a little more confusing. We're still going to try and do one example at least with nested if statements. So for a diagram of it, so test condition 1, if it's false, it goes directly to statement number 3. If it's true, it tests for another condition. If that is true, it goes to statement number 1. If it is false, it goes to statement number 2. And then when it's executed all of those, it goes to the last statement in your block of code. So for example, this is just one example. And I have given you one in the exercise as well to do at the end. I showed you the exercises last time as well, but since we hadn't covered this topic, I didn't ask you to do it, but now you can attempt it. So this is an example of a nested if statement. For example, age equals, and you ask the user to enter their age. If the age is less than 18, you print you are a minor, you are not eligible for work. So these are two print statements inside of one if statement. So it's a block of code. Else, now else would include anything 18 or over. So this is not less than equal to. So if the user inputs 18, it's going to go in here in the else statement, or 19, 20, or anything above 18. Now, what you do here is if age is greater than or equal to 18, and age is less than equal to 60. So it's used the AND operator here to check that the age is between 18 and 60. So it cannot be less than 18 and it cannot be more than 60. If it's between 18 and 60, it's going to print you are eligible to work. Please fill in your details and apply. And then healthy else statement. Now this is like we work with nested if statements. You could call this a nested else statement. So if this returns false, it would go to the else statement, which means that if the user entered an age of, let's say, 65 or 70 or 80, so this would return false. It would go here, it would say else, print, you are too old to work as per the government rules. Please collect your pension. So again, this is a very short script, but essentially what it is doing, it is using it is asking the user for an input, and it's using that input to check if the user is eligible to work, or if they're a minor, or if they're too old, and it's printing out statements accordingly. Okay. So before we move on to exercises, I'm going to do a nested if statement in the shell, and then we're going to see if you want to move on to the next topic, or you want to do another example. But I'm going to go to the shell now and do a nested if statement. Okay, so we're going to open a new file. And okay.
Ma'am, how? Okay, sorry for disturbing. I know now.
Okay. Yeah, I am hoping this makes some sense. I'm going to save it first and then, go over it. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're asking the user for an input. So, and we're saving it to the variable number. So number equals integer, input, enter a number. When the user enters a number, we run the script essentially. So we check if the number is greater than or equal to 0. If it is, it's going to print you have entered a positive number. If not, then it's going to print you have entered a negative number. Okay. Now, within the positive number part or greater than 0 part, we added in 2 more if statements. So if the number and then this percentage sign 2 equals 0, which essentially what it did was, if you remember for last line, it's going to divide it by 2 and give you the remainder. So this percentage sign essentially gives you the remainder. So if you divide the number by 2 and the remainder is 0, it means it's an even number. Else, this is an odd number. Then within this, once you check for this, if this returns true, then you check the number divided by 10. Okay, if it gives you a 0 as a remainder, it means that the number is a multiple of 10. Okay, you can add in more if statements, you can check more details on the number, or you can add in else if statements as well. But this is just a, I didn't want to take too long to write the script and still give you a feel of how it would work if you're using multiple if statements. So they would work essentially if the first condition is met, then it would go on to the second one and then on to the second one. If the first one wasn't met, it would just go to the else part and exit out of it. So let's try and run it. Hopefully I didn't, make any syntax errors in here, but let's try and run it and then we'll know for sure. So it's restarted the shell and it's
Ma'am,
asked.
I was writing.
I'll just, yeah, I minimize, not minimize, but resize this window so that you're able to see both of these. And it's easier to write. Okay. So now it's asking the user to put in a number. We're going to start with putting in a negative number. Okay. So -5. And since the number was not greater than or equal to 0, what it did was it completely ignored this whole block of code and it moved on to the else block and printed you have entered a negative number. If you run it again and you give it a 5, then first, because it saw that it was greater than equal to 0, it's printed you have entered a positive number here. Then it moved on to check if the number divided by 2 gave you a remainder of 0. Now, it did not give us a remainder of 0, so it did not print this and it did not even run this if part. It moved directly to the else part. So this, if you notice here, every if and else are combined. Okay, there does not have to be an else statement for every if, but if there is, they're actually combined. So anything with the same indentation would be combined. So this if has this else, this main if has this main else as the statement, and this if here does not have any else. Okay, so here, because it did not find the remainder to be 0, what it did was it moved directly to the else and it printed this as an odd number, which you see here on the screen. Let's try and run it again with a different number. Okay, so now let's add in a even number. Okay, so what it does is it tells you you've entered a positive number and it tells you this is an even number. Okay, now because now it would have run this, but because we didn't put in an else statement here, when it did not find this true, it simply moved out of that block of code. Okay, it did not have another block of code to move into. Okay, running it again one last time, hopefully. So let's say we enter 80 now. Okay, so now it's entered, you have a positive number here on the screen. This is an even number. Number is a multiple of 10 because checked for this condition, it found it to be true, so it printed it. Okay, and then it's going to ignore all of the else blocks because it met essentially all of these conditions. I hope I did not confuse you with that example, but did it give you an idea of how nested if statements work? So essentially, it's when you want to make your script, it doesn't make your script shorter, but it makes the running time, let's say, for your script shorter. So it would only check for these conditions if one condition was met, the first one. Okay, then only it would check for the other conditions. If it was not met, it's going to simply go into else. So when you're working with larger programs and you're working with larger data, this here wouldn't take up any time, but it would be useless to check for these if this was not met, okay, for you, for your work. So we put them in as a nested if, so it would only run it if the first condition or if the main condition was met. Does that make some sense? Yes, okay. What about Muhammad Azam?
Yes.
Yes, did you understand this part?
Yeah, I understand.
Okay. Do you want to go through another example of nested if statements, or should we have a look at the exercises and then see if we have time to just go over an overview of what we're going to do in the next class?
I think we should move on.
Okay. Okay, so these were the exercises from last time. I did ask you to do the first part, the first two exercises, because they were essentially just working with lists and sorting them into ascending and descending orders. I hope you did not have a problem with those. Then the third question was make a program that asks the number between 1 and 10. And if the number is out of your range, it should display invalid numbers. So this is a very, very simple if script. So you're asking the user for an input, or you can save the input in a variable yourself. And then you check if the number is between 1 and 10. If it is, it's a valid number. If it's not, you should display invalid number, okay? So if it is, you don't want to display any number, but if it isn't, you want to display invalid number. And then this is, you can do this using if and elif statements, exercise number 4. You can also try and do it using nested if statements, even though I wouldn't recommend it, but if you want to,
Ma'am?
Yeah.
There are only 4 people in the meeting.
Okay, that's fine.
Why are so many people not here today?
I'm not sure. I'm not very sure. Mohsina left. She told me she had to leave, but there's still Bilal and Mudassir here, so it's okay. We'll send an email to the rest. I believe when you registered for the course, there was also a condition of a certain number of hours or number of days that you were supposed to participate in the course to be able to get a certificate out of it. Also, more important than a certificate, if you miss out on the course or on any part of the course, it might be difficult to understand the concepts. But if they feel it's too basic for them, then you obviously can't force you to attend, okay? So the exercise 4 is combining if and else if statements. And what you're supposed to do it here is to essentially determine a person's stage of life. So you ask the user for, or you can use your own input for age, and then you check if the age is less than 2 years, it says print that the person is a baby. If it is between 2 and 4 years, is a toddler. If it is between, so at least 4 and less than 13. So you're going to use the AND statements here. So see the AND operators, sorry, here to combine if statements. Okay, so print that the person is a kid. 13 and less, at least 13 and less than 20 would be a teenager. At least 20 and less than 65 would be an adult. And if the person is older than 65 or 65, you're supposed to print that the person is an elder. I would really, really recommend that you do this exercise because it's going to give you a good feel of how you can combine all of these statements and also use the and the or operators. And writing this one script would be a very good exercise really to kind of cover all that we've done in today's lesson. Okay, so I believe that was all for this lesson that we weren't able to manage in the last class. We still have, about 35 minutes to go, 38 minutes. Mohsina, what do you suggest? Should we move on to the next? I don't have the slides for them right now, but I can give an overview of what we'll be doing in the next class. Or we can do a couple more examples of the same, or we can go back to you know one of any of the topics that we've done already and you have any confusions with, let me know what we should do.
Ma'am, I think we should do next class.
Okay.
Like what we will be doing in the next class. So like it's a good idea to actually know about the first class. So in the future, when we come next week, we know what to do.
Okay.
Some things and like time, like it won't be wasted a bit.
Yeah, sure, sure. Okay. So in the next class, which is essentially going to be week 4, but it's now going to be week 5, we're going to be working with loops and with functions in Python. So we've looked at a lot of functions already that are built into Python. The same way we can write our own functions. We won't be going into writing complicated functions, but I'll just give you a basic overview of how you can write a function in Python, so that if there's something that's not already built in and you want to use it, you just need to write that function once and then you can call it over and over again. So you don't have to write it in your script every time you want to do it. So even simple things like all of these statements that we used here to check for a number, or the same for the price and stuff, we can write them in the form of a function, and then we won't have to write this whole script over and over again. So we write it once and then we can just call that function. I'll let you know how that is done. And before that, we're going to be working with loops. So loops essentially there's two kinds of loops in Python. There's for and while. And what you do with loops is that, as the name suggests as well, is that you go over some data kind of from the start to the end. Or you can also go over some data repeatedly if you want. So a loop can be used to work with lists. A loop can also be used if you want to print something to the screen repeatedly, or if you want to check for a value repeatedly, or anything that you want to do in repetition. For example, for each value, for each index, for each character, you can do it using a loop. And there are two kinds of loops in Python. There are the for loop and the while loop. I will give you an overview of, I'll write it in the script and show you a bit about how loops work in Python. So for example, let's go back to lists, and I'll do a simple example of how you can use a loop for a list to print a list, for example. So let's see if we still have it saved somewhere. I don't know if it was, no, I don't think it would be in the same shell because it was restarted. So we'll make a new list again for colors. Okay. Now we can simply print it like this. So we write colors, enter, and it prints it, or we can also print it like this. This would give us the same result, or here's another way to print it. Okay, so what we've done here is, instead of writing it in one line, we wanted it to display the list in the form of a list. So generally, when you write a list, it's you write each element in a separate line. So we use the for loop to go through the whole list. And what we did was we assigned a variable. It could have been any variable. So for a variable x in colors, we want to print x. So what it does is it goes through every element in the list colors and it prints it and then goes to the loop again. So for index 1 in colors, print, then goes on, and it's going to keep repeating this till it goes to the end of the list, which is orange, the last element, and then it's going to stop the loop. Okay, so you can use a loop to iterate over or to go through a list. Then the same way, it doesn't necessarily even have to be a list. How about if you wanted to go through the let's say the characters in a string. So let's write a string. We're going to use a different variable. I don't want to keep using x. We can try a different variable so that you know that you can essentially use any variable. So for yn, and instead of the name of a list, we're going to put in a string here. So let's say we put in yellow here. Oh my god, I'm sorry for that. I forgot the colon again, which is why it gave me a syntax error. I'm just going to write it again. So for y in yellow, print. So what it did now was it looked at it, kind of saved that string as an array, or let's say as a list. It's looking at individual characters. So every individual character is saved in y and it's printed as this. It's going to do that till the end of the statement. We can also do this for longer statements. So for, let's say I'm going to do a, okay. So if you notice, even the white space, the space in between, it's considered it as a separate character and it's printed here as a separate character. Okay, so this is a test. So these are just, very, very simple things that you can do using the for command, and it's for loop essentially. And you can work again with a while loop in the same way. Their usability varies a little depending on what you want to do with it, but generally you can work with either of them and it should work. Okay, let's try and do something else. I'm not sure how it's going to work in this version. It used to work in the last version of Python. So let's say another, I'm just going to give it a name, okay, for number in range. Okay, so what we did here was we printed numbers in the range 8. But if you remember, indexing always starts at 0. So it started the number at 0, or the range at 0 essentially, and it's moved on till it's given us the 8th element, which is at the 7th index. Okay, so again, when you're working with ranges, you need to know how numbers and indexes work, and that there's a difference of 1 position between the two. Okay, the same way what you can do is if you want to print numbers in a range using increments, let's say, or differences. So let's say I'm going to use the same again in range, and you want to start at 10 and you want to go up to 50. I hope this gives us the right, because it's going to start at 0, but let's see what it gives us. Okay. Okay, yes. So now here, because you've given it a starting range, when you did not give it a starting range, the default for it as an index is always 0. But when you gave it a starting range, what it did was it started at that particular number. So it started at 10 and it went up to 50, and it's going to print all with an increment of 5. So with a difference of 5. Okay, so the first argument here is the starting point. The second argument here is the ending point, and the third argument here is the increment that you want to give it. Okay, so this is, again, these are very simple ways in which you can use kind of like single liners. You can also write the print command in front of it. It's your choice completely. But essentially how you can use single liners in Python to loop over a range of numbers, or loop over the items in a list, or loop over any kind of data essentially. You can also do this to loop over files. We'll be working with files later on as well, but this is just to give you an idea of how a simple for statement can be, a simple for loop can be so powerful when you're working with Python.
Roop, I get the range examples that you've demonstrated, but could you explain the string operations again? Like what exactly does A represent for A in this is the test? Like, is that an index? I'm just unable to understand that.
Okay,
How
so
does this work? Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to do this again for a different, and then when it's let's say give it a different. Okay, so essentially what it's doing in its back end is it's going over every index, and in this variable here, or A at the top, what it did was it saved whatever was present at that index. Okay, so this B here is at the index 0, and this character here, this variable is going to save the value B. It's not going to save the value 0. So it's not going to save the value of the index. It's going to save the value of what is present at that index.
Oh, okay, I get it.
Okay,
thank you.
Mohammed Azim, do you understand this bit?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, that's good. Okay, I'm sorry I did not have the slides for these because I thought we wouldn't get a chance to go over these in today's class, but we can just look at some examples and then I'll have the slides ready for you in the next class, or I'll actually upload them before the class. Okay, so again, let's work with another list, okay? So let's say we have a list of numbers.
Ma'am, I had a bit of a problem. Can you go a bit up?
Yeah. What
Just
part?
a bit up. The starting part.
Yes.
The one where you started the colors.
Yes, this part here. Colors equals.
Yeah. Not colors, I mean numbers, sorry, numbers. Where you started like the numbers of 8 like that.
This part here, when we check numbers, if it was a negative or a
Yes.
positive number, yes.
Yeah. I just want to see it. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so now we're going to work with, let's say, a list of numbers or a list of scores, and try and use the for loop to work on it. Okay, we're not going to make it very long. Let's start with. Okay, so we have this list here. And we can again iterate over the list using the same. So let's say we keep the name of the variable n. So for n in scores, print n, and what it's going to do is it's going to print all of these in the form of a list. And let's say what we want to do now is we want to, for the same list, instead of printing just these numbers, we want to print, let's say, a square of these numbers. Okay, so we do it the same way. So we loop over the list in the same way for n in scores, print, and within the print statement, we want to, instead of simply printing n, we want to give it a power of 2. Okay, so if you notice now, again, using kind of a single liner or 2 line, what you've done is you're printing out squares of all the numbers in your list. So the square of 1, the square of 2, 5, 6, 11, 13, and 20. Okay, so the same way you can do multiple functions on each and every element of the list and display the results simply by using the for loop to go through the list. Does that make some sense?
Yes.
Okay, let's see if we can do an example on a string again. Okay, so let's use character again, or just simply ch. in So again, what we did here was we simply printed out the string in the form of a list. But again, we can do different functions on this. So you remember that we could find out the length of a string using, we didn't save it in the form of string. Maybe we should save it first. It would make it easier and shorter. Okay, so let's say A equals, to write this again, Python week 4. And then we do the length of A and returns that the length is 13. Okay. Now, the same way that we wrote the whole string here, we can actually just write A here as well. So for CH in A, print CH, and it should print the same, Python week 4. Now, if you want to print this in the reverse order, you remember that there was a function by the name of reversed. So what we do essentially is, again, for CH in A, and then before that, we write reversed A. And I think we shouldn't need to give it a range, but still we'll try and run it this way, and then we'll try and give it a range and then see what happens. Okay. So this should work. Yes, so if you notice now that it's the same string. So in A, we saved Python week 4, but we can go over it in reverse as well using the reversed function that we studied off earlier. The same way when we're working with lists, we can sort the list and then go over them. There's multiple, all of the different functions that you've done already, you can actually use them within the for loop as well. So what it did was it essentially printed it in reverse. Okay, now you can, if you don't want to print the whole of it, you can also print part of it. Let's say we don't reverse it now, but we give it a range. So we want to start at the first index, which is 0, and we only want to print up to 5. Okay, so index number 5. Okay, this did not work. Not callable. Okay, I think this works with list. So it should work with this as well, with a string as well. I don't know why it didn't work. Let me see what happened. String is not callable. Okay, let me try and use square brackets and see. Works now, or then we're going to just leave it for the next lesson and call it a day. Okay, no, it still doesn't work. So there's probably a different syntax, but essentially the same way that you printed the reverse of the string, you can also print part of a string using the for loop. We've already printed parts of the string otherwise, but we can also print just part of the string using the for loop. I think I'm having a trouble with the syntax here. I'm probably mixing it up with Python, with Perl, but I'll go over this and I'll add these to the slides. I'll just make a note here. Looping over strings. Okay. And I'll close the shell for now. Again, this is just one kind of looping statement that's there in Python. There's also the while statement. It works more or less the same way as the for loop works. Just a difference in syntax really, and a difference in the kind of places. So some places it's preferred to use a for loop, and some places it's preferred to use a while loop. It depends on the kind of conditions you want to put into the loop. Okay, and again, we'll be working at writing functions in Python. And then hopefully we'll be able to cover all of this in the next week and then move on to introducing modules and then in class assessment. So you should be ready for that. It's not going to be a difficult assessment, but we do want to know how much you've learned. Okay. I think I'll just go over this again, see if we missed out anything, or else again, it's just 10 minutes left, so we can call it a day. So we did if, blocks, else if, and then we combine them using nested if statements. And again, please do at least do this last exercise. It's better that you try it today. If you get a chance, it's probably just going to take up 5-10 minutes of your time to write the script, because it would still be fresh in your mind if you would be able to think better of how you would be able to write it. But at least before the start of the next lesson, please do have this done, so that you understand how these work. Again, you can do these using simple if and else if statements, or you can use a nested if. It's your choice completely, whichever way you want to go about it. Okay, and that's it from me for today. Any questions?